with NLP, with hypnosis, with subconscious reprogramming, it's always like subtle shifts that keep building upon each other, right? That lead to these like bigger impacts in your life.
I call them micro shifts.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I was noticing, but didn't notice at the very beginning, of course, because they're subtle, right? But when I looked back, I was like, the way in which I was responding to things in my life, to events in my life, I was taking things a little less personally. I wasn't comparing myself as much to others.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Flip Your Mindset. I am your host, Stacey Uhrig, and I have Julie Costa back with us today. If you have not heard my first episode with Julie, you're going to want to look for the link in the show notes to that. Julie came on as a guest to share with us a story. It was a story of her life, the adverse experiences that she had in her life with sudden tragic death of her mom, the rupture of the relationship with her dad, and how that impacted her. And at the end of that episode, we started tapping into where it led her, which was doing some hypnosis work, and how she started to see some shifts in her life from that. So what we're going to focus on today is how the hypnosis shifted for her, why it shifted for her. And we're going to kind of just jam out geek style on like all things trauma and all things subconscious. So welcome, Julie.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back.
I know, it's exciting. So look, in the last episode, we dug deep into your childhood. We don't need to do that. But as you ended that episode, you were sharing with us how you had gotten into a program where you were learning hypnosis. You were going through the practice of hypnosis with other people, and you were starting to see micro shifts in your life. So you had shared in the other episode how you were really keen and good at putting up walls and keeping people at an arm's length distance for fear of abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
So how did the hypnosis help you with that?
Yeah, so I'd say it was a combination of modalities because the certification program I was in, there was 6 certifications in total that you received. And what I always share with clients, and like I'll share with my community, is like with NLP, with hypnosis, with subconscious reprogramming, it's always like subtle shifts that keep building upon each other, right? That lead to these like bigger impacts in your life.
I call them micro shifts.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I was noticing, but didn't notice at the very beginning, of course, because they're subtle, right? But when I looked back, I was like, the way in which I was responding to things in my life, to events in my life, I was taking things a little less personally. I wasn't comparing myself as much to others. So when I'm just thinking of things in general, it was like those shifts. And then one of my favorite modalities that I love to pair with hypnosis is time techniques or timeline therapy. And that works with releasing the emotional charge behind certain stuck emotions. So like anger, sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, shame. And I would say like when we were doing that modality, I started experiencing more shifts because it was the way in which, like we were talking about in the first episode, how you respond to certain events because you attach the meaning to it before, it loses that emotional charge. So you kind of neutralize it. And then that allows you to take different actions.
Can you share what timeline therapy looks like and how it works for the listener?
Yeah, so you are in a light trance state, so not as deep as hypnosis. And in a nutshell, we all have a timeline stored within us subconsciously. And that timeline stores all these events and experiences in our life. You can go back past generations, past life, in the womb, during birth, after birth. And what you're doing with time techniques is you are going back to the very first event or experience where you felt anger or fear, because that first event or experience like attached the meaning of it for you, like created that internal representation. And then every time you met it after, that's the meaning, right, that you associated with it. And so you go back to that first event, not to relive it, not to reassociate, but you're more so like floating on your timeline, looking down, and you're gaining new positive learnings to take with you. So for example, let's say if I were to go back to my mom's death, I'm looking down on it, but I'm gaining new positive learnings to take with me in the future that could sound like, well, like I am strong and like I can get through anything. Like I know that I can because those learnings are going to support me in the future. And when we get those learnings, it helps to release that emotional charge. And then you start to respond to like that emotion of fear or that emotion of grief very differently.
It's interesting because I do a lot of that in rapid transformational therapy where we don't do it on a timeline, but I just ask them to go back, whatever it is we're working on. Let's just say it's fear of abandonment, since this is what we talked about in the last episode. I might say to the person, we want to go back to a vital, vivid, crucial time in which fear of abandonment started. And what I explained to my clients beforehand, just like you said, you're like hovering over this timeline. I'm like, did you ever see Christmas Carol? Where like the guy's going back to like the past, the present, the future. And he's like kind of like in a room and he's watching things from the side, or he's kind of floating above it. Maybe like that's what you're going to be doing, but you're going to be watching yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you're a silent observer. And then when they go through the experience, whatever came to mind for them, whatever I always say, whatever your subconscious chooses for you to see. And I say, well, what were you feeling? What were you experiencing in that moment? What were you able to do with those feelings, with the resources you had in that moment? What beliefs did you decide to make in that moment? Like, how did it shift the way that you started to live life? And then as they're sharing this, I say to them, now I want you to repeat after me, but it's not me because I'm not whatever the age was, let's say 6, because I'm not 6 and I have more abilities and I have more resources to be able to process this. And I can do this by, and then they fill in the blank. And so they start to see and gain that clarity of, I don't need to be there anymore. That's no longer relevant to me anymore. This is what's relevant. What I know is true. What I know is going on in the present time. And that reframing really allows the person to gain a deeper clarity of how the experience was interpreted. But like you said, then allows them to experience something similar in the future, that micro shift from a more neutral standpoint.
Which makes a world of difference. It's freedom. And I do this every second session with a client. And like what you just get to see and witness, which I'm sure you do too with yours, is like, wow, like they are responding to things so much different now. And it's just, it's mind blowing. And I'll share too, like when I first did time techniques, I couldn't go before I was 10 years old. It was almost like I had that time period of my mom. And like I have learned and I share with everybody, like your subconscious, right? It's job to protect you, keep you safe. It's only going to present to you what you're ready to work through and like handle. And so the more I've done this, I actually just had in December, so 2.5 months ago, the biggest breakthrough with time techniques where I had always had this underlying feeling of guilt for literally living my best life and being fully happy because I thought it was because my mom wasn't here and alive. And I thought it wasn't fair. And so when I did this, I actually went back in my timeline on time techniques and I was in the womb. And I knew there was a conversation being had with my mom and my dad. And I was the first child. And my dad was feeling like with me being born with a child, he was going to lose the attention and love and affection from my mom. And so I learned that like the guilt I've been feeling, it has nothing to do with my mom. It came from then and feeling the guilt of literally just being born because of like what it was doing for my dad.
You know, I have had a handful of clients be able to go back to the womb. And what I'm going to say is this, not all my clients do it. I've seen a clear common denominator of the clients that do go back to the womb. What I say is they're very, very spiritually connected. These are people who do Reiki very naturally. Maybe they're mediums. Like they have a deep connection to a higher self that's already established. Right. So you've been doing this work for so long.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised when they go, like, I'm always actually thinking like this one could probably go back to the womb. Like and then they're like, I'm on the other side. And I'm like, all right, cool. So what's going on there? And, you know, if I say to them, what are you feeling? What are you experiencing? What are you hearing? They all say the same thing my mother's experiencing, feeling and hearing. There's nothing that separates us. And I think it is so important for people to understand when we hear this bullshit about, oh, they're little, they're not going to remember. Oh, the body keeps the score.
We remember everything.
The body and the nervous system feels and categorizes and remembers everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
it's so fascinating because I had one. So to your point, you felt this guilt from the get. And again, there's no language for it. You're pre-verbal, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
feeling. So I had a client that came to me in her 60s that she felt her whole life she never belonged,
Yeah.
that she
Relatable.
never belonged even to her own family, right? And
Same.
right. And so what came out was I think she was 9 months, like, I'm not kidding, like 9.5 months younger than her sister. Like her mom came home from the hospital and probably got pregnant like that first night.
Wow.
Right. And the
Wow.
mom was young. So as we were talking it out in the first few sessions before we did hypnosis, she's like, well, my sister hates me. I'm like, but does she really?
Mm.
I mean, what's a 9-month-old child interpreting when another baby comes into the mix immediately? And by the way, mom now feels like shit your entire first 9 months. She's exhausted. She's not even recovered from the first pregnancy, and she's pregnant again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I said, maybe your sister doesn't hate you. Maybe there's just a part of her that feels like she wasn't enough, that
Exactly.
another kid came into the mix. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure this baby's making the assumption mom knows exactly what the fuck she's doing. Mom doesn't know at all what she's doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And she said when she was in the womb, she felt as though this was not a wanted pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it may not have been a wanted pregnancy. She may have not wanted to have gotten pregnant right away.
Yeah.
That's possible.
It is
Right. And
possible.
so if the mom's feeling that, the child's feeling that.
Yes. They will.
And she said what was really interesting, and she's given me permission to be able to share the story, that she knew she was a ball of love and light. She knew she had this inherent gift to bring joy into an unjoyful situation. But the joy was felt like a threat to the other people because they were so unhappy. So she kept hearing, you're too much. You're too much. Dim it down.
Yeah.
Quiet it down. And so she shut off that very beautiful, glowing, joyful, authentic piece of herself to feel connected. But she still didn't feel connected. Right. So this is great that we're talking about this, because I'm sure someone's listening going, holy shit, like it could go back that far. And by the way, I've never felt
It's far.
I mean, look, I have plenty of friends that do, regression therapy where they do past life therapy. I mean, I have other people I can bring on to the podcast to talk about past life regression, but it doesn't have to start in this lifetime either.
No, I've had plenty of people, not that like what I do is not past life. It's just that they can go
Same.
back there. Right. Yeah. It's not
Same.
what I do. And many have gone past life and past generations. And yeah, like in December, that was the first time I went back to the womb. And that was like very enlightening for me. It was probably like the biggest breakthrough I had had.
How does it change your life?
Yeah. So the reason I spent a full-on breakthrough day with my mentor in San Diego. So I flew across the country.
I remember you were doing that.
Yeah. And so the reason why I was specifically working on, I'd been with my boyfriend 6-ish years, and he has a 14-year-old son. And I was doing the close, but not close enough card. And I really wanted to work on opening myself up there. And I know what was happening was also because I was young when my parents separated, and my dad had somebody in the picture right away after my mom died. And she also had a boyfriend at the time of her passing. And it just felt like way too soon. And so my mindset is like, well, I don't want to step on toes. So I want to keep my distance. So I knew there was an opportunity. And so I have just felt, yeah, like this underlying guilt that like I can't show so much love or show so much affection or like live life to the fullest and like be really happy, or, even get to that next step of like engagement and marriage and all that. And when I had this realization, I was like, oh my God, it has nothing to do with my mom. And like, even though she was in that conversation with my dad, it's like a lot of his stuff came up that whole day. But then ironically enough, what was it, 2-3 weeks later, Then I got engaged.
I know, I saw that.
I was like, go figure.
Go figure, but you're ready for it.
Yes. And I felt more like, okay, I can actually really like take this in and enjoy it and not feel like guilty about it or that I shouldn't be really happy about it.
And you know what else is like coming to me as we're having this conversation is that, it doesn't start with us. Like everything you're saying, it's like, my dad had his own shit. I heard, in the womb that he's like concerned and I don't want to be a burden and blah, 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 blah. The reality is that all the ways that we're parented affect how we see ourselves. And the way that our parents are parented very often is a result of the way that they were parented.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And the way that our grandparents were parented, like we are often carrying like the shit of 7 generations on our back.
And I always say too, it's not to make any parents right or wrong, right? Because it's all we know.
They only knew. That's
know.
right. That's right.
Yeah,
they can only know when you know better, you can do better.
Exactly. Because I'll have clients now, they're like, oh my God, am I being a bad parent? Like, what am I passing on? And I'm like, you are consciously aware right now. So it's like you can make changes. Like you said, once you know you can do better. But past generations, like nobody knew. Like everyone was just doing the best that they could of like what they were told or what they learned.
And what was available as far as information. I mean, anybody from our parents' generation on, if they were going to seek out any kind of mental health, that meant that they were mentally ill and they were psychosis and all this different stuff. The stigma was so extreme. But also, to your point, am I fucking my kid up? We're all fucking our kids up. Like we're all a work in progress. But if you can be a cycle breaker, you're creating a legacy for a much healthier generation to follow you. What I hear a lot is people who are ready to address that mist of dysfunction that they grew up in, but then there's a level of guilt that they're talking badly about their parents. I see that a lot.
Yep.
And all I say to that is your parents parented from what they knew with what they had at the time.
That's one of my favorite NLP beliefs is like we're all doing the best we can with the resources we have available.
Absolutely. And you can be frustrated with your parent, but there's also at some point, and look, I have my own crap that I deal with, right? Like I'm constantly working through saying, I guess they really did do the best that they could with what they had while they had it, and I don't know if you do any of this. This is not really part of my hypnosis training, but it's more part of my trauma recovery coaching certification is genograms. Do you ever do genograms?
No, tell me more.
So genograms I do them with my clients a lot, and it's very empowering for the client. A genogram is a family tree.
Oh.
And what makes the genogram unique is there's a legend, a set of images, they're connectors that all indicate a certain kind of relationship type.
Interesting.
So let's just say you have your level, like with you and your siblings, and then above you, you have your parents. And you can have these certain connectors that connect you to your parents. Maybe you have one kind of line from your mom, but then maybe a different kind of line from your dad, and then different lines between the different siblings. But then the power is getting curious about, well, what kind of lines does your mom have to her two parents? And what kind of lines and what kind of connections does your dad have to his two parents? And then what kind of lines did your grandfather have to your great grandfather and your great grandmother, and so on and so forth? When you can visually see it, you're like, oh my God, it didn't start with me. A. Yeah. And B, it can open up a line of communication and dialogue with other family members to ask questions and say, hey, I'm doing this exercise for myself. And I'm just curious, which line connectors would you have chosen to represent you and your dad and you and your mom? And how about your dad with his, right?
That's very cool. I like that aspect of it.
It's powerful. And it's so funny because I started therapy when I was 15, and the therapist that I had literally rolled out like a 6x4 piece of paper, like 6 feet by 4 feet, and started creating something like this with me and caused me to go back and ask certain questions. And I know her goal was to show me it didn't start with me, but she never told me what it was. And I remembered it my whole life. I knew how it was the most powerful and impactful thing I ever got out of therapy.
And then you learned it later in life.
Yes, in like 25 years of therapy I had. It was the most impactful thing I had at 15. Then I'm in the certification and they start teaching it to us. And I go, holy shit, there's a name for this thing?
You're like, I
What?
remember that.
Oh my God. So now I'm like doing it all over again for myself. And I'm literally looking at all the connections coming into me. And it was painful. And I had so much compassion for myself in that moment and that younger version of myself. And I was like, how did you survive that?
Yeah.
How did you survive that? Go fucking you. Look at what you did. You're going to call.
Which is huge.
Right. So I know we're talking subconscious, but sometimes it goes all over the place here, right?
Well, there's so many things when it comes to subconscious.
So many things, but it's just so important for people to understand that the behaviors that you have in your life, the habits that you have in your life, the feelings that you have that you can't describe or you can describe, but you don't know where they come from. There is a way to navigate all of it. And if you have found up to this point that maybe you've been in therapy or you've worked with a coach and like nothing's really shifted in the way you're looking, seeking out someone that does work at the subconscious level could be a very, very powerful thing. Whether you're working with a coach can be a hypnotherapist, a coach can be doing NLP, they can be doing timeline therapy. If you're looking for a therapist, like maybe you only want to work within your network and you want to find insurance, look for a therapist that either is certified in hypnosis or EMDR. I've heard very good things about EMDR. It really allows you to get under the hood, right? But that general, like high level, conscious level talking therapy is not going to touch the feeling because it's just in a very different part of the brain.
Very different. And I say all the time too, like I'm a huge cheerleader of therapy and hypnotherapy at the same time. They complement each other so well. Yeah. You need the therapy to talk out the thoughts in your head. Like you need to get them out. And then when you compare it with the belief system that's driving everything and the way that you're operating, it's powerful. And I always share, it's like when you can combine the two, because the beliefs are like 90-95%, like you're going to see progress a lot quicker.
Well, it's interesting. And it's really important for people to say, we're not saying either or, we're saying and. No. And it more likely than not, lately, what's been happening, I've been seeing a lot of people coming to me because they've been in therapy. They love their therapist, but they're stuck. They're in a loop. So then they find out what I do. They go back to the therapist and they say, I want to just put this on pause. And I want to try this program because I have like the succinct 2-month program that includes hypnosis. And then they come to me and I say, well, if your therapist wants to collaborate, like it's a village approach. And so I have an authorization release form. She hasn't, or he, she, whomever the therapist is, has an authorization release form. And then we can actually collaborate with this idea of, look, you specialize in CBT. I don't, but I specialize in hypnotherapy. And you don't.
It's a collaborative process.
And so how can we use this collaborative process to help this person? And with the right therapist, it's gold. Sometimes I have therapists that know I'm trauma trained and they're not. And they'll call me and say, hey, can we collaborate on this one client? I've already talked to her about you. Could you do a consult with her and see if you think it's a good fit? So it's really important to understand we're not saying do this or that. It absolutely can be collaborative. And when it is, it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
It's incredible. And like, I'll share all the time too with people. It's even when I jump on consults with people, it's like, I don't care if I'm not the right person for you. At the end of the day is we're going to find who the right person is for you, right?
Absolutely.
That's why I love saying, like, it is the collaborative process. if there's somebody that's saying like, yes, it's only this way, like they're really not looking out for the best interest of you. Like it really
Agreed.
needs to be this collaborative process of what is best for the client.
Right.
Um, yeah, and that's why I love it. The two together, because like I collaborate with a couple of
Power.
therapists for some of my client. It's a power combo.
I don't doubt it. I agree. I see the same thing. And I did just have a conversation with a local therapist the other day, and she's like, hey, the more modalities, the better. Like,
Yes.
she's like, I
Yeah.
can't know everything. I have my expertise. You have your expertise. You don't know what I do. I don't know what you do. But together, this could be like killer for this person. And I'm like, that's the way we want to approach it. Not
I
from a
100%
scarcity perspective.
agree
It's
with
total
you.
abundance,
It's so much abundance and how
right?
yeah, how people can work together and have those different referral partners in their system. Because, like you said,
Yeah.
different modalities, referral partners, and like that's what's going to work best for that one person.
That's what we do. All right. Mindful of the time. We're at the top of the hour. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
It was
you.
so
I love zooming
awesome.
out on this stuff.
Yeah. So, guys, if this was of interest to you and you have new to the podcast, you're going to want to go back. There's probably close to, I don't know, almost 90 episodes at this point cataloged on this podcast channel. And it's all about mental health. There's storytelling, there's expert series, and it's the cheapest way you can get some access to some mental health information. That's all that it is. It's just a little bit of a guide to help you on your journey if you happen to be stuck or curious. So thank you so much for joining me today in that effort.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.